don't go social early on. Don't start putting it on LinkedIn. Don't start telling all your friends this is your company, what it's doing. It makes it much harder to change direction. If you have to call up all your friends and family and all these people and say, well, that thing I've been talking about for the last 3 to 6 months, actually I decided it sucks and doing something else.
So you were at Twitter. What are your thoughts on everything going on with Twitter right now? You know, Elon Musk took it over. What do you think the future for Twitter really holds?
I think that Twitter has tremendous potential. This sort of super app, if you will, that can do all sorts of different things and do it in a very sort of clean fashion. I'm bullish about what can be within that Twitter product.
I think too, the whole like free speech thing is interesting. I just saw this thing where he like removed the New York Times badge or whatever because they were like providing false information about the Israel-Hamas conflict. That was like pretty crazy. Book launch. How many podcasts have you done already? Or what number is this for you?
You know, I don't really know. I'm losing count, but it's interesting just doing the podcast thing. We set these up and they're like, great, we got you slotted in for January. So it's like people plan these things sometimes pretty far out. So that's been interesting.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, for me, we've got quite a bit of people, but like, we just try and make it, I'm like, one of the, cultural values of Attentive, I know this because obviously my wife works there, but is like default to action, right? And I'm like, just get it done. Like, if you want to have someone on, get it on. Like, I don't know why it's taking people so long. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think that it's because they kind of do like a cadence of like one a week or whatever, and like full schedule or something. But I don't care because for business books, you don't really have the same like big release that like a fiction book or some celebrity biography or something. There's not really that momentum. You actually it turns into a word of mouth thing, and the goal is to peak over time. So you want the sales to peak, in year 2 or year 3.
Yeah. I guess that makes some sense there. And for you, I remember you sending me, why we're on this podcast is because we chatted about 2 months ago or something. I was raising some money and I was like, oh, Brian, let's chat. You were gracious enough to say, all right, let's hop on. And you gave me some tips, right? And then you're like, hey, I'm actually writing a book. And it's literally going to cover all of this in detail. So you sent me like the manuscript or something. It still had like red lines on it, and all that. And I was like, and so I dove into it and I was like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And why I loved it in particular is because a lot of the startup books I've read in the past, and this is just my own kind of review, were like very theoretical, right? Very theoretical, and from lots of people that have never actually been in the pit or like been in the weeds of actually building something. It's all kind of from an outsider's perspective. And so yours came from the perspective of, hey, I started Tapcart, which sold to Twitter, and then I just started another company that may or may not be going public at some point in the future, right? I don't know how, what we could say, what we can't, but that was what blew my mind. So it was kind of like, hey, here's actually how to do it from someone that has done it before, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great startup books out there, but where we kind of saw an opportunity was a lot of the books were heavily sanitized, So you had the same, these books that would be like, here's the story from Apple and Google and a couple other places. And you felt like you'd heard the story a couple times before.
Yeah.
And it was like very PR friendly, version of things. And then, B, what do you do with these things? Like you read them on the beach and, maybe it's a little entertaining, but does it actually help you go start your business and scale your business? I'm not sure. So I wanted to just be very, very tactical and practical on how it could be used.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to do an exercise with you, but before we get there, because one thing I'll say is we just raised $2 million as a pre-seed round, actually. So we just raised that. And I would say I'm a walking testimonial for you in the book, because I literally was like, all right, how would Brian deal with this situation? And I'd actually go back to the manuscript with all the red lines, and I'd be like, all right, how would Brian deal with this situation? And no joke, like a month and a half after reading that and like kind of looking at what your playbook was, we ended up closing it, which was like 2 weeks ago or something. Yeah, thank you. So going back to that, I think it'd be amazing to focus on your first 12 months of Attentive and like, how did you deal with the cold start problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that oftentimes the mistake that I've made and that other folks make is kind of jumping right into a business and committing to that business and saying, this is what we're doing and going, right? And, that actually, it does feel good to say, this is what my company's doing. I'm going to go do that. Let's go. And, you didn't really take a lot of time to explore. You just went, right? And I've done that. And I did that. We started Attentive with another name, and we kind of did it with that mindset of like, hey, I have an idea. Let's just go start something. And that ended up not working out super well. Because although it was an interesting idea, and our idea was this concept of helping big distributed workforces like big factories, it was that we wanted a way for executives and managers to easily communicate out to all of those employees in real time using text messaging. So, hey, I want everyone to take a training. I want everyone to know that we made some change. I want everyone to know whatever. Also, here's a survey, give me feedback, give me ideas. I want to send that out to everyone and make it really easy for these non-desk workers to reply. Because these are people that, they're not checking their email all day. They're not, taking surveys all day. They're mainly on their phone. Let's engage them on their phone. So that was like the initial idea. And I went out and I did, we built the product and I did 100+ demos of that. And over again, people just didn't want to buy that product, but what they were interested in was using. They had a big problem, which was they could not reach their customers. They were not successful in getting in touch with their customers anymore, and they said, "Hey, can I just use this text messaging to reach my customers? I don't really care about talking to my employees, but customers, yes, figure that out." So it just comes from finding a real problem, which we ultimately turned over by talking to lots and lots of potential customers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's not the first time I've heard that story, right? Which is like, if you look at, so I was early at Outreach, and at Outreach, early on, like it was really a recruiting tool first. It was a tool built for recruiters, or there was a recruiting tool built. Outreach was reaching out using this internal tool that was built to sequence people with emails and stay consistent, right? And people eventually said, hey, we don't want your recruiting tool that you're reaching out to us. What are you using to stay so consistent in reaching out to us? And then that's when it clicked, like, oh gosh, like that is actually what people want, which is like sounds just so similar to yours, which is like people were like, hey, I get this kind of like mechanism you're using, but I want it for this thing over here versus what you're trying to do with it, which is super interesting. Now, like, how often do you think that happens, Brian? Is that the first time that's happened to you, or has that been part of your process overall?
I think that's happened in every company that I've started or been close to. And, I think you've got to listen, and it's actually pretty hard often to make the change you need to make because it involves throwing away a bunch of stuff and it involves going in a pretty radically different direction. And a lot of people are not comfortable with that sort of change and flexibility. Sometimes, people get really tied to a certain product they're building, a certain mission. They have a certain vision and they just want to sort of see that through. And they block out, hearing the feedback from, people in doing that. And just as an example, when we were doing Attentive, the initial name of the company was Franklin. And, we weren't completely unsuccessful. We sold the product to a handful of customers, and we had a big public company that was went through legal red lines and was about to sign off and give us a big deal. And, myself, my co-founder, looked at each other and we said, if we sign this deal, we're going to be pretty committed. And we don't really we actually don't feel very good about where this business is going to be in 2 years. It'll be okay, but it's not going to be a great success. Whereas this other potential thing we think could be really big. So we ended up basically throwing away 6 months worth of work across a team of 12 people. We ended up parting ways with like 4 or 5 people that, would have only made sense. I guess it was only 2 people, but that only made sense for the prior business, and, really going in this other direction. But I think that's really hard. I think that's hard to do for a lot of people because it's hard to throw away something you've spent a lot of time working on. And I'm talking 6 months of startup work. So that's like 6 years of normal work. I'm talking about, hey, I worked today, but it was a few hours. There was some study I read recently that the average corporate worker does like 3 hours of work a day.
Yeah.
Like as a startup person, you're doing like 12 hours a day. So it really is like an incredible amount of additional work nonstop. And then you throw that away. Like that really sucks.
Yeah. And I heard someone the other day say something like around inertia can sometimes be the worst thing for you, right? Which you kind of avoided this inertia that you almost would have had with getting this Fortune 500 customer, because you were going to be married to that, having to do that, right? If not, you would probably have to start a whole nother business, which who knows how that will roll out to do this other idea. So, and that takes guts to do that.
It's hard. It's hard to do it, but at the same time, I think it's necessary in order to make something big that you're really excited about, and that that's going to attract the talent you want. I had experienced this once before with my first company we started. It started out, we had a bunch of mobile apps during the very early mobile app boom days, like 2011.
Yeah,
and we had this one app where the whole idea was like buying something in a mobile app, which at the time was still a new idea.
Yeah,
it was kind of like Wish, where we like really easy payment information stored, one-click buying, just like buy immediately in the app, and we sold a bunch of stuff. And we were doing not a joke, right? We were doing, I want to say 35, 40 grand a month, right? So it went from 0 to 30, 45 grand a month in maybe 3 months. So pretty quick that it grew. But we realized that, hey, that business, while it was okay, we didn't think long-term it was great, but B, there were all these issues we had for the app that we started building tools for. And we said, you know what? I think a lot of our other friends who have apps would buy these tools from us. Let's just productize that, sell all these software tools to everyone else. And that's maybe like a much better business. And we ended up doing that, and it kind of didn't work for like a little bit, but after 9 months it took off, and then, really went to the moon.
Yeah. And that's what you sold to Twitter, right? That was like Tap Commerce.
That's right. Yeah. This is called Tap Commerce, and Tap Commerce was around for about 2 years. So we started that in June of 2012 and sold it to Twitter in June of 2014.
Wow. So you were at Twitter. Now, this is a little off topic here, but what are your thoughts on everything going on with Twitter right now? Elon Musk took it over. Like, what do you think the future for Twitter really holds?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Twitter has tremendous potential to be this sort of super app, if you will, that can do all sorts of different things and do it in a very sort of clean fashion. So I'm bullish about what can be within that Twitter product. I think it's really good too because it pushes innovation in the social space, in the US, which I think needs more innovation, right?
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see more innovation there.
And Elon, I mean, when he came in, he pretty much slashed like 80% of the workforce. Don't quote me on that, or something crazy. And you were still CEO of Attentive at the time, right? And so did that influence you at all? Like with Attentive, like, hey, maybe this thing's bloated, or maybe we have too many people doing too many things, and how did that influence you at all, and kind of how you ran Attentive?
Yeah, no, look, I think that I would separate the right amount of people that should work at a particular company in different roles based on different strategies, and the way that you actually augment the workforce. I think that for the former, when I worked at Twitter, I think there was a strong general view that the company was quite bloated, right? That there was a feeling like, hey, there's a lot of people that we probably could get along fine without. And then two, I think probably more importantly is that investing in stuff that can really be important for the product. So putting headcount behind that and putting wood behind that, which I think is really the direction that he took things in.
Yeah.
So, again, I think it's too early to say. And obviously, Twitter's something that's gotten very politicized, and I don't think that's great. I think it'd be nice if it wasn't politicized and focused more on, the impact that it could have competitively for social networks and media and other things in the United States, because it should be a bigger part of the conversation, where it can't just be Facebook that is doing everything. It's for the best of Facebook too to have real competition.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see where Elon goes with it. I think too the whole like free speech thing is interesting, right? With it and him trying to not have people push a certain narrative and get away from, or Twitter pushing one narrative as maybe they have in the past and all that, which is quite interesting. I just saw this thing where he like removed the New York Times badge or whatever because they were like providing false information about the Israel Hamas conflict, which I thought was like pretty crazy. Right? He's just like basically throwing them under the bus, saying, you know what, no one should believe what you say anymore, which is interesting. But I want to go back to starting companies, Brian, because your book is like, again, I think one of the best handbooks, I would say, on this whole process, right? And from learning about you, and it sounds like y'all are really good at going 0 to 1, right? Saying, hey, we're at 0 revenue and we're going to take this thing, prove it out, and see if we're going in the right direction. What are your frameworks for saying, hey, we're going to build this thing and getting it in the hands of the right people, especially in 2023, where, as you know, like cold email isn't what it used to be, right? Text messaging has a lot of regulations around it. Like you can't just start cold texting people, right? As a channel, paid media is getting more expensive, right? And then the market is, and another thing is like the market is becoming more saturated with software tooling because it's so much easier to build with AI and all this stuff, right? So with that in mind, like, how if you went from going 0 to 1 and getting this in the hands of people, and then moving forward, like what would you recommend people do? And like, what are you advising companies to do in this?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is you have to compensate people for their time. So when you're early on and you're still figuring out, what your customer problems are exactly, and then once you feel like you've got an idea of what the customer problem or problems are, you're going to start testing solutions, right? You have to understand that most people don't want to spend their time helping you figure out what your solutions should be. So you got to compensate them. I think it's always funny to me where people are very willing to go hire someone, I'm going to hire some inside reps for, 7,500K, whatever it is. But they're unwilling to pay $100 or $200 or whatever it is for a 30-minute or hour-long chat with their buyer, right? I would really lean into offering compensation to people to get their feedback. And this is before you've got a product, right? This is like you're just getting there to hear from an expert and learn from them. Expert networks and getting feedback has been around for a long time. I think that you can do a lot there by aggressively, reaching out to people and offering them compensation for their time to get their feedback. Now, obviously, that's different than, okay, now go sign this contract, right? But you only get to be, hey, go try the product out and sign this contract once you feel like you have something that works, right? To me, it's much more just focused in the early days on getting that feedback, and then if you feel really good about all the feedback you've collected, then you build an initial product. You also are hopefully giving that out for a degree, for free, make it easy to try, and then ultimately have people pay for it.
Yeah. How much did y'all spend? Like get it for Attentive, for example? Like what kind of budget did y'all have for that? Because that's my first question. Yeah.
It's not that much money. I mean, look, this stuff is all relative. But we in total, I think, to get our first 100 customers, build the initial product, all that sort of stuff, we probably spent about $1 million.
Yeah.
So, and that includes salaries for the entire team. Founders didn't take salaries, but salaries for, anyone we hired, anything we need to do to get people's time and get them on the phone, design, all that sort of stuff, is probably a little over.
Yeah. $1 million. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if you think about $1 million to build something that's built to last like Attentive, right? Now what is y'all's valuation? A few billion or something like that. At that point, spending $1 million to figure out like, okay, like this thing has legs, we're going to move forward. Right. In the grand scheme of things, definitely not huge. And now something interesting.
And I would say like that's also milestoned over time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So not like you walk in one day and you say, boom, I'm going to spend $1 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We put some of our own money in because we had sold our prior company. We also raised, about $1 million from outside investors across, a handful of people. I'd say 8 to 10 people that wrote checks in to that very early convertible note, to see what it could do. And, you're spending $100K a month, right? Maybe 80 to 100K a month. So, you get that outside money, makes you a little more open to spend the money. You're spending $100K-ish a month or something like that. It's not like you just have to write for $1 million. You do some stuff, see if it works, and then you buy.
Yeah, I would say the conversion rate on that. Obviously, you're looking at that and saying like some of these are converting to customers as well, so you're making the money back as you're going. But that's funny because I've used this strategy. I mean, if you look at outbound prospecting strategies, right? Companies will do this with like gift cards and stuff like that. And what's crazy is like I've never even thought about doing that for like this early. What you did was basically prospecting, but more feedback kind of related stuff, right? Which is amazing. I'm actually going to go do that now because you're just saying like, hey, do you want to be a design partner, right? That's kind of what everyone's shooting for these days, or the ways that like VCs will tell you, hey, go get some initial design partners, like have them use it for free, right? Ask them if they want to be a design partner. But you made a good point, which is like, not everyone wants to just go in there and use your tool and be kind of the guinea pig. They want something that's going to really like solve that initial problem. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you also have to find people that want to be guinea pigs to an extent.
Yeah.
Like look, I do think that there's a little risk though, because you want to make sure that when you're identifying a problem in the market, that's not a problem. You want to make sure that's a problem that all of your potential TAM, all of your total addressable market has to a degree or is getting. You want to make sure it's not just a small cohort of guinea pigs that have that problem, but most of the market does. And I think this is a pretty common mistake that happens is companies make a product that they think works for a big market, but it actually only works for a small cohort of the market because only a small cohort of the market actually has that problem or, that your solution works for. They see some immediate success, hitting that low hanging fruit, getting those early customers. They jump up to, 5-10 million in revenue. They think they figured it out. And then all of a sudden they kind of hit a wall because they have to go outside of that initial core group, where the selling was easy and the product worked. And then they need to sell to a lot more. And it turns out the product doesn't really work or the market doesn't really want it for the rest of the market. And that's why I think you see a tremendous amount of companies that are able to get to 5-10 million in revenue, pretty quickly, but then all of a sudden they run out of steam. And that's probably, it's very common. I mean, the hardest thing is not getting off the ground at all. But I think too often you hit 5 or 10 million and then, growth gets a lot slower because it's harder to find, those next.
Did you hit that with Attentive and have to like recalibrate it all?
We did not with Attentive. With my prior company, we were much more worried about it, which is part of the business. we got to about 20 something million in revenue. And, we looked, and, that's, we went from 0 to 20 in about a little over a year. So it was very fast, but we looked at it and we said, you know what, I don't know how I'm going to get to 40, or 30 for that matter in the next year. So I think that well, it's very hard to see out a couple years. Like when we were starting to kind of the idea of getting it to hundreds of millions of revenue, which is it's at now. Many, many hundreds from 0 in 7 years. It's hard to imagine, but at the same time, it's 7 years in the future. Who knows? I had a much better idea on what was possible in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. And when you found, whatever the term people are using these days, product market fit, or, when you're like, okay, this attentive thing's going to work. We're going to do text message marketing for e-commerce brands, and you found that was working. One thing that I'm thinking about is like, okay, we have this thing, it's working with a few subset of customers, right? We're getting some revenue in. How did you think about how you were going to like hire early on? Right. And I know this is a big question that people have is like, all right, who's your first hire? What are your first hires going to be? How did you think about that specifically for Attentive? And would you have changed anything?
Well, if you got the money for it, the number one hire I would make early on is a full-time in-house recruiter. So, I think that's a role that CEOs always say, oh, I spend a bunch of time recruiting. But if you actually look at the calendar, often they don't spend that much time. And I was at a dinner a few weeks ago where the CEO of OpenAI said that he has spent, over the last, I think, 6 years, he spent 30-something% of his time doing recruiting. And he looks at his calendar each week to make sure he's doing that much. And he's still spending over 30% of his time recruiting. And it's probably like the hottest tech company out there, right? I think that I can't underestimate the value of spending time recruiting and its ability to bring in top talent. And I think that, especially now we're can be pretty competitive for that talent. And I think if you have a full-time person that's just focused on that, you're going to have an incredible funnel of people. You're going to be able to pick great people. And also, by the way, if for whatever reason someone's not working out, it's not a fit that you hired, whatever, it's also much easier to replace people as your business is growing. Whereas on the other hand, if you don't have that and it's really just reliant on you and, to go figure it out, I think that's very hard. And, some people hire outside recruiters, but they're very expensive, A, and B, there's an incentive disalignment, right? Because outside recruiters, they just want to fill the role, right? They're not really worried if the person is going to work out and do great. They kind of just want to fill roles.
Yeah. That's actually interesting because a lot of people I've asked are like, hey, which I've kind of thought the same thing too. It's like, hey, hire customer success managers when you're first hires. There's a common one. Another one's like engineering. Lenny Rachowski has a newsletter. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a pretty good. He was like product Airbnb. It's a huge product newsletter. You should get on his podcast, by the way. He's got like 100K followers or something on his newsletter. So good size too. Anyways, long story short, he put out this chart recently, and the chart was like all your first hires. I didn't see recruiter. And it was like 20 top SaaS companies. I didn't see recruiter on any one of those. Right. Which is, yeah.
If it's a SaaS company, I think that they're, look, there's a founding team. And I, my answer changes a little bit to the founding team, but I think the ideal founding team is a product person, a tech person, and someone that can work the business side, salesperson type mindset. Right. But after those core three, I think the most important hires are A, a recruiter, and B, inside sales. And the reason I like inside sales a lot is that you can, on a cost-effective basis, you can get a tremendous amount of customer feedback very early. And that ultimately should shape the product that you decide to build. You can hear the customer problem. You can build out the customer funnel quickly. I think it's a huge mistake to go hire a handful of engineers early on, or something like that. Sometimes you strike gold, right? Sometimes you get a team of 5 or 6 engineers and they build the right thing. Most of the time they don't.
Yeah.
And the worst thing about having a bunch of engineers is that you got to give them something to do, and then they go build it, and then you got to go sell it, and then no one wants it. And then you just built this thing and you got to go back to them and say, you know what, this thing you just spent the last 6 months building, no one wants it. And then they're discouraged. They don't trust you. They don't want to build the next thing. So I think it's very, very dangerous to hire a handful of engineers early on and just start building shit. I go by the mindset of build last, rather than, this often pushed idea, just start tinkering. I think that's terrible.
Yeah. What's funny is I feel like you have to screw up a few times to actually like figure that out on your own too. Right. Because you ask friends and like, they'll come to me because I built a lot of things just as you have. Most of those things have failed. Right. Most of those things have failed. And that's the stuff I don't think enough people talk about, but most of the things that I've built have failed. And it took me 3 or 4 times to realize, like, before you build anything, like, you have to understand if this is something people really want, which is the obvious thing. And then these mental models that I've put together myself are like, and I always live by these before I built this new product that we're building, is like, 1, can you take something that already exists and make it like 10% better, right? Or 20% better, right? 2, can you democratize something that like only people with money are using, that like Uber, for example, getting black cars, right? Which is obviously a one of the bigger examples, or can you do that? And then the third thing is like, if you build something that you yourself would use, there's probably a million other people out there that would use it. And those are kind of the 3 things I've done. And before, the first things I started to build, the big mistake that I made was like, oh, I think other people would think this is a cool idea and this is going to be the next SpaceX or whatever, right? And then you kind of like shoot for the moon, realize that like, hey, there's so many like that. There's so many things wrong with that. The timing could be off. It could be not solving the right problem. It could be for the wrong market, yada, yada, yada. So it just took me so long to do that. Which is interesting why you say that. And now I have buddies that come to me all the time and they go, hey, I want to build this app. Right. And I go, oh, what's the app? What do you want to do? And they're like, well, it does this thing and it does this and it goes from X to Y and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, why can't you build that with a spreadsheet first? Right. And they'll go, well, no, because that's not cool. And I'll tell them, well, it may not be cool, but like, if you think about it, if someone's not going to download your spreadsheet that solves this particular issue, what makes you think that they're going to go through all the loopholes of downloading an app on their phone? Right. And then so now I'm kind of the friend that they don't come to with ideas on apps, because I'm just going to tell them like the truth, which kind of sucks, but I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think politeness is probably the greatest killer of entrepreneurial ambitions. And what I mean about that is when people have a particular concept, idea, whatever, they go around, they talk to people about it, a few people, and everyone just says, oh, that's great. That's awesome, Andy. That's cool stuff. That sounds great, right? And you're like, oh, wow, everyone says it's great. I should definitely spend some of my money and spend a bunch of my time, which your time's the most valuable thing, and go build this thing. And it's bullshit, because most of the people, they might not even have known what you're
yeah.
They don't even know they don't even know what you're talking about. Most people don't have any idea what you're talking about, right? Because they're like, yeah, that sounds good, Andy. Sure, okay. Like they don't care. The few that might though and actually get it, they don't want to tell you that, because they think that if they tell you that, you're not going to like them, and it's going to be a problem for them, and you're going to say, oh, Brian's a dickhead because he told me my product sucks. And I think that's very, very hard to overcome. You need to create an environment where people can give you actual critical feedback on what they like, don't like, and how much they really think about your product. And I'm always astonished. by what happened. Like you'll do a pitch. Oh yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to solve this problem, this solution, etc. What do you think? Oh, it's great. They're asking questions. You think it's going great? But every time I like to get a rating. So I like to say, okay, on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being, I'm not at all interested. 10 being, I love this. I want to buy it now. Let's go. I'm going to invest. What level of interest are you? And you'll think the pitch is going great, and then the person will be like 7 or 7.5, which is basically a 1, right? Like they tell you it's 7 or 7.5. That means for most people, that's like a polite, very low score. So I think that just by pushing people to get you that thing, and then also I think opening up you say, okay, well, what do you like? They give you what you like, and once they give you some positive feedback, then it opens them up to be like, okay, great. What do you wish was different? And then that's the only, that's the feedback that really matters. And I think you need to be intellectually honest. This is the other thing that I think they get into. And this kind of comes from laziness, frankly, which is that you spend some time, you have an idea, you want to go do it. You don't really want to be bugged with like the fact that the idea doesn't work. You don't want to have to go find new ideas. So you just want everyone and everything to tell you that it's great. So you only hear the good feedback. And when you hear bad feedback, you say, whatever, bad feedback, I don't really care. So I think that's the other kind of big danger, is someone just, sort of putting their blinders on and only hearing the positive stuff, and then they just keep doing it. And look, I've seen a lot of people do this when they have a company and they'll have a thing and they'll do it for years and years and years. And they've never heard what the real feedback was.
Inertia kicking in for, the bad inertia, I guess is what you could say, right? And not being intellectually honest over time, it compounds into you getting more of that inertia, right? And then you kind of convince yourself or create that narrative in your head, like, no, everyone else is wrong. Everyone else is wrong. Everyone else is wrong. You feel stronger and stronger about it. And this is coming from my own experiences as well, like having done that, right? Question for you. Who do you go to for honest advice? Like, do you have a board of advisors or like, a group of friends that you go to and you're like, hey, is this idea shit or not? Or I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think?
I mean, look, I have a whole bunch of entrepreneur friends, and I speak very openly about what I'm thinking about doing in companies and things like that. Like, I think that another sort of classic mistake is people that are super secretive about what they're doing. And, I got some bad news for you. Like, most ideas and things, there's other people already working on, and they're probably not going to be your buddies and friends you're talking about. There's people everywhere, and a lot of it's going to be execution based too if you figure it out. But I think that the openness, I've always been pretty open when talking to buddies and friends about what you're doing. But I also think, look, that only goes so far. You got to go talk to people that are your buyers, right? Which are often not your friends and people. Like it's those random people, which is why I think adding an inside salesperson, preferably a couple early on, doing those random meetings. They're not friends of friends. They're not going to be polite. They're random people who are just going to tell you what they think. I think it's super, super powerful to get real feedback early on. And then if it's going to work or not.
That's actually seems, again, another piece of advice I like that seems contrary to what most people say, right? Like the first one being the recruiter, right? Like I haven't heard anyone say that, but when you think about it, it makes total sense because all of the logic that people hear and we tell ourselves is like, hey, recruiting is the number one thing you need to be doing all the time. And as CEOs always say like, hey, recruiting is their number one job. But then when you look, they're not actually doing it.
If you want to be a big time CEO, I think there's really only three things that you do. And maybe there's maybe a fourth in the corner, but there's really three things you do. One is you need to figure out the vision for the business. And that means identifying a real problem and then testing different solutions to solve that problem, right? Number two is get the money in the bank. And the money in the bank is typically based on whether or not people buy the vision, which is usually tied to like a bigger market and trends, and your own reputation. Because early funding is basically trusting the person that you're giving this big check to, that they're going to go spend that money building something of value. And by the way, they could just pay themselves a whole bunch of money, and never anywhere, and you get no control for them not to do that. So it's very much a reputational thing. So number one is vision. Number two is getting the money in the bank. And then number three is the people. It's the recruiting, right? It's just finding people. And why do the people come and work at the company? They come and work at the company because of the vision and because the company has money to pay them based on your reputation, right? Now there's like a fourth bucket of things, which is like accountability and making sure that everyone's accountable and keeping them accountable and setting the pace and keeping the speed of the company, because speed is the one thing. Speed's what's going to make your company successful. Like, you talked about Elon earlier. Elon's number one statement is that speed is the ultimate offense and defense. Speed is basically all that fucking matters in the company. So like, if you are able, and what I mean by speed is not building one product and say we're going to make it in 6 months. You build the one product as fast as you can and do it in a month or 6 weeks or whatever it is. We built our first product for Attentive in about 45, 50 days, right? And we just got it out there, minimum product possible, and just started, shipping it, get it out in the world and getting numbers from it. It gives you a lot more at bats. But those three things are really, to me, what matters. Vision, money, recruiting people. And then, but like if you recruit the right people, that fourth bucket of like needing to keep people accountable, you do that a lot less if you recruited great people. Because great people don't need to be held accountable. Great people have a passion for great work, and they just want to do great work and ship things and scale it. And that was probably the biggest difference between my first company and my second company, is that I was able to hire better people that were able to just rock and roll without a lot of my oversight, really. And that allowed me to just focus on what I do best.
And let's talk about that. Like, what's your mental model for like this, figuring out if someone is a great like going to be one of those people that you don't have to hold accountable because they're going to do a great job. Like, what do you look for when you're interviewing them, especially early on, right, in the company? Later, it's a little harder because you probably weren't involved in all the hires, maybe mostly just executives. But what did that checklist look like early on? And then how did it shift, or did it stay the same as you became a 1,200 person plus company?
You have to understand what drives someone, what's in their heart. What do they want? What do they care about? And how that maps to the job that you want them to do. So I like to ask people basic questions like, what's their ultimate dream and goal? Why are they doing this? Why do they think this job is a step towards that dream and that goal? Why do they have that dream and goal? What's it based in? What's their ideal setup? I do think that there is a portion, like, look, anyone who can find the thing that they want to do in life and do that thing, it's not going to be work. It's going to be doing their thing. They're going to like doing it, right? And if you like doing it, then you're going to do it all day long happily, right? And then look, there are always parts of these jobs that stink, right? There's always going to be a component of it. And certainly earlier in your career, there's probably more of it that stinks because you have to build up to getting certain skill sets and certain things to reach different milestones. But like, you have to be understanding how that fits into a larger structure of building a dream that you're getting towards. And I think that's what my biggest thing is making sure that those are aligned, because I want to help someone who has a particular dream that aligns with what our company can give them on that dream. If it can't, then they're never going to be that motivated to work in the company when it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I'm sure you just intuitively get an eye for that over time too, or like an ear for it, I should say, right? Of being able to sit down with someone and be like, does this align? And like, are they truly going to just care about reputation and doing a good job, regardless if I hold them accountable or not, And there's a caveat there too, that like, if you're hiring people that are like straight out of, school or entry level, something like that, they're probably not going to have the best answers questions, because they're like they may not have gotten that there and figured it out yet. And that's totally fine, right? Some of the best hires I've had were people that, they weren't exactly sure, but they know they really wanted to achieve something and do something great, but they weren't exactly sure how that fit into their plan. And that's fine. What worries me, like I was interviewing someone the other day who
was like, hey, what do we want to do? And they were like, well, I want to be a psychologist and therapist. And I was like, why are you talking to me?
Yeah.
And they're like, and we just had like a 10-minute interview. It was fine. And get to that. And, and they go, well, I feel like what I've heard is that I can't do that job for like, another 5 to 8 years because, you have to be a bit older before people trust you to give advice. So I'm just going to do other stuff between then and now. And I was like, well, that's fine. But mentally I'm thinking to myself, but you're not going to do that working with me because, we don't have sponsored people that are just waiting to do something else and are just kind of like, checking in and checking out. Like we want someone who has a passion for it and it's fitting into their vision because they do well in this role. They're moving up roles and they're getting more and they're excited. And I want to help people like that. And I want to focus on helping people that are like that and not people that have some other interests.
Yeah. And something that strikes me here is, you think it sounds like you just asked some very simple questions. Simple, I would say on the front end, right? But it can be more complex in the back end. But simple on the front end, like, hey, what is your dream? Like, what is it that you want to accomplish? And the more I've learned and like the older I've gotten, I've learned that, you think when you get out of school, you have to ask these super tough questions for people and they have to be like some great questions and, out of nowhere, the best questions in the world, when really the most simple questions give you the best answers a lot of the time on what you need to know. And I don't know, it's kind of coming full circle here in discussing this with you because, I would have thought you would have had some crazy mental checklist of like, hey, here's how we hire great people after all these years. And no, it just comes down to like, hey, what are their goals and how does that align with where this company's going? Like what is it you want to do? Right.
Well, there's where's your heart at? And then where is your skill? Right. And the reality for a lot of roles is that you don't need some incredible intellect or some ridiculous skill in order to be successful. Obviously, for engineering jobs, you're going to make sure that the person is a great engineer. So there's things that obviously you're going to test for, but at the end of the day, I think the heart has to be there, and I think the skill bar certainly depends by role. You want to make sure the skill bar is reached and over, and you run into that issue on the skill bar for sure. And there's many a person that we say, oh, is this person really going to be happy in this? Like, are they going to be happy in this role? Are they going to be excited to do this role? And is there heart in it? And that to me is harder to see. Whereas like the skill thing, you can kind of rock.
And getting on this topic, which is related, like you're hiring people so that they can do a great job. But as you know, a founder, you're like the company's your baby and you kind of want to like, a lot of founders have this trait of perfectionism, right? Or like wanting to oversee, make sure things are done right because it is your baby. You care a lot about it. How have you gotten over? How have you thought about delegation, right? Kind of, and I would say, been able to delegate better to these people over time, right? And how have you dealt with it? Because I'm sure you struggle with it at some point. Maybe I'm assuming that, but you've had to like kind of work on that skill and be okay with other people kind of doing things when they wouldn't be as good as you would do, right? Maybe in that sense. So how have you dealt with that?
Well, I think there's a few things. But one, there's a thing that my exec coach, this guy, Matt Mochari, amazing exec coach, does where he goes back through, you go back through your calendar, you basically say what gives you energy versus what takes energy away, and focusing on stuff that really gives you energy is a big thing that he pushes. And I think that if you can find where things that give you energy and that you're also good at come together, focus your time on that, and then wherever possible.
What is that for you? What do you think that is for you?
Well, look, I think that changes over time with the needs of the company. Right. And the scale of the business. But, for me, I think it's the intersection of being able to work on a problem and a solution for a product. So, sort of finding that product market fit early on. And then B, once you find that, being able to work with different people across marketing or sales or whatever it is, partnerships to really scale that engine. And I think that, if that's what you're the best at, then that's what you focus the time. Like now, with my company, kind of like I spent this morning on some calls around our positioning, product positioning and packaging. And that's something that I feel like I've held on to probably the longest and been the most intimately connected to, because I think it's the most important document for that company is how we communicate, what our products are, how they work, why they're better to our customers, right? The sales deck and the material kind of around that most important document we have. So I would just focus on that. But there's all sorts of other shit. Oh, it's a blog post. Do you want to write it? I don't care, because no one who's going to read that. Not a lot of people. So there's a lot of other stuff that I wouldn't spend time on and just say great. And there's problems and there's issues and it may be off, whatever. But if you get the stuff that really is the most impactful stuff, then that's great. And then two, I think as CEO, also just something else I like to really turn over in my head and push on is, what is the boldest thing that we could be doing right now as a business? And just asking yourself that question on a regular basis. And then, because there's a CEO founder power that you have, that maybe I didn't realize until somewhat recently, but there's an incredible power you have where you can kind of do anything. You can really do anything you want if you're the CEO founder. You really can. And I think that people don't realize that. They say, well, I can't do X. No, you can really do anything you want. So go do that. But because you're one of the few people that's empowered to do anything they want at the company, you obviously I'm not saying you can, but you really can kind of do anything. So you're empowered to do that. Most people are not. And that allows you to prioritize things and say, okay, I've raised my hand and said, I'm going to do anything I want. Let's go do this. And you have an incredible ability to move things and push them. And, you talked about Elon before. I think that's really been Elon's biggest success. His power, but it's actually a power that we all have, which is that as CEOs you have, is that you can say, let's just go do X. And I'm going to just push resources and go do X because I think X is the most important thing. And that's it.
I'm sure some people with that, with hey, we're going to go do this. Some people may say, well, that's a different direction. That's not where we want to go.
Most people will. A lot of people will. And they'll say this isn't consistent. And, you said something else 9 months ago and, management's all over the place. And, these guys don't know what they're doing and all that sort of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You'll hear all of that. And that's fine because the experience that most people have, if they've worked other jobs in big companies and whatever, is the opposite of that, right? The experience they have is company just kind of has the same Coca-Cola and it's just selling Coca-Cola over and over and over again. And we're just going to keep doing that steady as she goes, whatever. So I think that greeted with, the chaos and speed that comes with building a real fast moving fun company is very different. And I tell people look, you got to be cool with because we're going to learn things in the market. We're going to learn things in the market and we're going to find out, oh crap, that thing we just spent the last whatever on, it's actually, we're just going to throw it away because something else is much cooler now. We're going to go do that. And there's a reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is, I'm taking notes here, right? Because, exactly what I just told you is exactly what, as what happens. And it's almost like you just got to push through it. You yourself as the CEO founder, just know that people aren't going to be are going to be against it, and you have to set that expectation that this is just how we're going to roll.
Well, I mean, but I'm saying too, you need to also though, as part of that, I'm not saying to be an authoritarian leader. What I'm saying is you should explain, hey, here's why I'm thinking
do this,
that we should do this other thing, or why here's my focus, here's why I'm thinking it. Let's talk about it. We can all talk about it. And like, look, your mind may be changed. You may hear everyone's feedback and you may say, you know what, that's a good point. Let's not do that. Like I've done that all the time. So I think you do have to be willing to talk it over with people and hear feedback. But when you've got the conviction and you've thought it through and you've talked to people, my biggest point here that I'll just come back to is that you can do anything you want. And I think that this is something that CEOs forget, is that they can really do what they want. And there's so many excuses on why they can't. Oh, you know, such and such won't like it, or such and such whatever. You go, okay, but why does that matter? Like if what you want to do is you think is the best for the business succeeding, and the reason that your investors gave you money is they're trusting you, ultimately, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Go do that.
Yeah. Give us the 2-minute pitch on your book, just so I want people, because I can give you my perspective. It's awesome. Everyone should go read it, buy it, download it. It's like a legit startup handbook on how to raise money, build a company, think about all the stuff Brian and I just talked about. But from your perspective, I kind of want to hear from you, Brian, on maybe why you wrote this thing and what you hope for the book.
Yeah. Good question. So, look, I think at a very high level, I would say this book is built to be an extremely, extremely tactical way for anyone to figure out what is a company that they can start, from the beginning, how to find the idea, how to find a potential business that they can start, from the ground level. And then once you find that problem and begin experimentation with that solution, it then has a whole bunch of, different practices and things that you can incorporate into hopefully making your business successful. And I might just reiterate a few of kind of the core themes of the business that I think maybe are a little contrary to what might be out there, which is number one, I think you should build last. I think that it's a big mistake to just start building, whether it's software or hardware or, a physical product. I think it can be really, really dangerous and trap you to just start building and get stuck in a crappy company. You get committed to a crappy company. So don't do that. Number two, and this is like a little related to that, don't go social early on. Don't start putting it on LinkedIn. Don't start telling all your friends this is your company, what it's doing. It makes it much harder to change direction if you have to call up all your friends and family and all these people and say, well, that thing I've been talking about for the last 3 to 6 months, actually, I decided it sucks and doing something else. So you don't want to, and you also don't want to post it on LinkedIn or anything like that, because then the minute that you posted it, you're committed to a degree and your network thinks that's what you're doing. And then you seem a little weird when you're changing it every 3 months. So I hold off on going social for a while. We talked about how politeness kills. I think that's another big theme. So just make sure that you're getting real feedback. It can really hurt you, and consider hiring, recruiting, and sales very early on. So those are some of the lessons. But if you check out the book, you'll get even more.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brian. Hey, it's been a pleasure. We'll get this out, and then maybe in the future we'll have you on again at a later time when you write the second book or something like that. All right. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Take care.